one is obviously the hardware, and two is the software, right? So the first one side is the equipment, and you don't have to be proficient in understanding exactly, down to the technological level. And I'm saying from a technical manager's point of view or a technician, but you do have to understand how to use the hardware and the software to at least an intermediate level, so that when you are working in the studio, when you are, let's say broadcasting on an outside broadcast, then you know how to use the equipment. You don't make mistakes. The broadcast can be, something that's sounds good, and you don't have to cry for help every 2 seconds, and make things. I would say make mistakes that you can't actually fix, right? The same way you would have to, like I've said this before, you have to make sure that your studio is a second home to you. Really understanding that, for example, like I always use the analogy of an octopus. At some point, once you learn the studio, it is quite jarring. It's a little unpleasant in the beginning. There's quite a lot of things that are happening in the studio. The desk is quite daunting. Working the desk, understanding what each channel is for, knowing that the playback system is obviously running concurrently to the desk, and knowing the how to use the playback systems that that station in specific is using. We'll go through some of them in the next chapter, I think, the next lesson, should I say. And using the phone lines, for example, using the TV channel. Let's say you got DSTV streaming through, and you want to quickly hop on over to a live broadcast of like a game or whatever it may be, or let's say some breaking news that's coming off CNN or whatever it may be, right? That you just want that coming through in your desk. The desk is also, from DJ to DJ, can also be set up and customized, so that we have certain jingles that play within one on our quick play in terms of the software. But also we have certain, again, there we might be doing a co-host, and we can set up channels for each of the presenters and the contributors as well. There could be certain specifications that are customized specifically to us. I'm particularly thinking of larger discs that have a couple of channels, about 16 channels. But we normally start off using a disc that has about 8 channels, right? So on the one side, we're working with stuff with like the mics in the studio and the phone lines, and on the other side, so I say it's about 4 and 4 channels that we're working with. 4 and 4, I say, on separate sides of the disc, and the other channel is for music playback, quick play, whatever it may be, right? Okay, so once again, first side is equipment, hardware. So how does radio reach listeners? Well, through the waves, radio waves at the moment here in South Africa, and audio through the internet from a mechanical and scientific standpoint. And the second side are how radio professionals use modern software and computer programs in conjunction with the studio to utilize broadcast equipment and to enhance their program delivery and enrich their shows. So once again, as I said to you, the predominant one is that we want to look at is the playback system, right? I would say maybe 10 years ago, it was quite stock standard that the SABC stations would use RCS as a playback system, whereas the privatized stations would use Genesis. But there could be a manager that just decides, they quite like some other playback system that is available. It works for them, and they train their staff to use that in particular. At community stations, there's variants. There's free software. So, for example, Radio DJ is quite popular as well. You can also download Radio DJ and play songs, and you can play jingles. If you have jingles, you can see how you can upload music and try to start working with some, music categories and rotations and stuff like that. So it's quite. I always say Radio DJ is quite advanced for a free bit of software. Just play through one channel. I'm saying there's only one channel that music plays through, but we can then also assign different channels, for example, for bed music and again for quick play, etc. So I'm talking about the stuff you're saying. What is this? What is? I don't know what these things are. It's okay. Just giving a good broad overview for this, and we will see as we move along. Right. So let's look at the broadcasting chain. Refers to the series of connections between the system where the content is loaded, right? So the transmission point of that content, and then the signal that's distributing throughout points that come in and out of the broadcasting studio. So we have input links. So we bring content into the studio through telephone lines, maybe through the internet. We have ISDN lines and ADSL lines for OBs, right? So outside broadcasts is the obviously the term there, OB, outside broadcast. We look at output links, so input coming into the station, right? Okay, and then output links transmit the content out to the listening audience, one through, again, telephone lines, internet lines with streaming stuff, satellite lines, or satellite links, should I say. So, like I said, there, the DSTV, FM signals that are caught and routed by an FM transmitter. Also, another option there. All right, so if we have a look in your textbook, 7.1, figure 7.1, and as you said, we are currently in chapter 7, so you can go ahead and follow along there. Well, the broadcasting chain kind of looks like this. We have independent elements like the internet lines and the telephone lines, and then we have the remote studio lines, so that obviously are in the studio itself, right? Um, that let's look at the other side there. We have the broadcast links, the FM transmitted links, satellite links, telephone links, and then internet-based links then as well. So why are the two independent? I mean, they're not the internet lines and certain telephone lines are not linked directly to, I would say, the physicality of the broadcast studio, right? So we can actually go and like so have the internet, for example, is a good example, I think, to really understand that. And we might be transmitting a stream, for example, and that would make some sense there. Just from a graphical point of view, you can see the mics. So here's the desk over here, right? And again, this is a monographic, right? So what I would like to do actually is in the next, I say, so not this week, next weekend when I see you, we'd like to just hop on over to the studio, the BMH studios, and let's quickly see how much of this we can actually recognize right directly in front of us. You will see a phone line, you will see, you will see a CD. I think there should be a CD component here. We use the CD component. Genuinely, should the disk for whatever reason go offline, quote unquote, right, or the transmission go dead from the so let's say from Centec or whatever it is, right? We would then have a backup CD that would have pre-mix there, jingles, IDs from the station, etc. Music, um, no links, for example, and we'd just play that while that actually, we fix the situation, right? A computer necessary for so many reasons. One, the playback system, so we might have the screen just in front of us that shows the playback system, and so we can manage the music and the jingles, whatever it may be. But we might also have another PC that has the internet for us, so we can, get mails, we can get WhatsApps, we can download content, whatever it may be, put up our prep, it doesn't matter. Ideally, the prep should be printed out. It's much better for you just in terms of control. And then we have the speakers in the studio. So, for example, we want to be able to, when we go off air, want to be able to hear what is going out on air, but also we can PFL it, so we can pre-fade and listen to a person that you're speaking to on air, off air, should I say, like an interview, want to get set up. And listeners, for example, want to put on air. For many reasons, those monitors are very important. The microphones that could be anything between, I suppose, 2, 3, 4, 5 mics across the studio. And again, your headset, right? Okay. All right, analog signals and then digital AS3 signals, right? So let's look at the analog quickly, the telephone lines, phones, the headphones, the speakers, and then the digital lines. So the satellite there, right? Okay, the computer and the CD itself. Okay, digital. All right. Okay, so permanent studio. So in studio versus a remote studio. Remote studio connects with the permanent on-air studio, which is constantly in use. So again, a remote studio, we're looking at an outside broadcast, a little OB van that's heading out there and is at an event, a music event, maybe a shopping center, whatever it may be, maybe a school, who knows what you've organized with clients that you would go out there and do some brand awareness and some brand collaboration. So the remote studio is the main site for all live broadcasts activity. When required, we could also just set up the say the remote studio. So it doesn't necessarily have to be part of an OB van, which is obviously integrated into the studio is integrated into the van, which always is very cool. It looks very cool. It is very cool, but you can do it just like it's an ad hoc pop-up studio as well, right? So having actors help radio stations to manage the delivery of a radio show, regardless of where on-air presenters may be. And OB studios are less like physical studios and more like pop-up mobile studios. So there you go. Right. As I said, this lesson is very short, and so what I want to do, and then we'll get into the newsroom just here. So just examples, like for example, this looks more like it's an outside broadcast. You can see that the desk is there, and well, this one's a little bit more lackadaisical. Don't think you find a lot of people just sitting back and relaxing, but if not one for effects, right? Okay. And for example, here is, you see, very simple pop-up studio here. Little desk there, monitor with speakers there. This was during obviously COVID. 5FM Dream. I won't say going to say the Dream Team. They're not. No offense, but they're just the drive team there on location, and they are busy shooting. Obviously, just a little bit of a pick for social media or whatever it may be. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play out to just quickly. I'll do a new share. A new share. Go here, share the sound. Excuse me, my technical prowess. And I want you to watch this video. I'll put myself on mute. Just a minute.
So today we're at the York Spring Fair at York Racecourse. It's a lovely sunny day, well, lovely sunny afternoon because it was pants this morning, and we're just outside the outside broadcast unit here at Y1 Radio. It's absolutely gorgeous inside. Let me just take you for a quick little tour. So this is the side of the van here, and here is the gorgeous vehicle. So inside, as we have to step up, we've got all the mod cons that you probably expect with inside an outside broadcast vehicle. Now, I'm doing this tour because a couple of you demanded the tour on the channel, so this is what we're doing for you right now. So we've got the computer here, which we do all the voice tracking into, which I'll show you in a couple of seconds' time. Underneath here, a miniature, little tiny computer about yay big. I'm sure it came out of a Kinder egg. But it's a very little powerful device. It's solid state drive in there as well. We've got the microphones here, which are these Shure. Just 1 second. Yeah, they are Shure's, and they're the UKCA. Don't know which make they are actually, but anyway, it's Shure on the microphone. We've got two of those, one for the co-presenter and one for the presenter itself. We've got Class A servo bias roadcaster here as well, which is driven into the computer down below. We've got down lights from here. We've got speakers connected to the side wall here. Very comfy chair when you sit in it correctly. And this side panel then sweeps across and closes the whole thing off, and it's very well, it's very well lit. It's very well soundproofed as well. But we've got a gate which is on the roadcaster, which I set the other day. So when we put the microphone up to the top, I've placed a gate on it which will then cut out any ambient noise in the background. Although we do tend to have the door open because we like to catch the atmospherics, you know, and you need to catch what the atmosphere is like outside. So that's why we have the door open, just maybe a little tad, because Josh Benson is on stage right now, sounding very loud. He is doing the children's entertaining on stage right now, so it has to be quite loud. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to shut the door again. It's because Josh, you're too darn loud, man. So I'm going to fetch up the software here, which is Playout 1, which we use as our VT software here in the browser. And we've set up this system here as an outside broadcast unit to do links into the system. So it goes into the microphones, through the broadcaster, through the USB, into the software here. And the main aim of this vehicle really is to, which is very hot now, I've closed the door because these downlights are quite hot, but the idea of this outside broadcast unit, there's a 5G, 4G aerial on top of this roof, which then gives us an amazing coverage for the local area. It really is a fantastic coverage that we've got here at Y1. So this will go out and about all over the place, and you can do outside broadcasts, and interview guests, etc., wherever you are across the area. It really is a fantastic setup in the back of this outside broadcast vehicle. So if you are thinking of getting one, I would highly recommend to do so, because it is just brilliant, really is fantastic. We're going to be out and about at York Pride, we're going to be at the Rotary Club Dragon Boat Race, we're at the York Spring Fair at York Racecourse right now, and the idea is that we're going to be out and about all over the place to do our outside broadcast. So that's just a miniature tour of the outside broadcast van. Hope you enjoyed it. By the way, if you love the channel, please subscribe to it, push subscription, get notifications on there, and do like the video. And please feel free to comment as well, as many people have been commenting over the past couple of weeks and into the months as well as we do this. So I'm off to go and do some voice tracking right now, get the weather in the can at least, and we do have a facility of going live, by the way, on Playout 1, which is the Mic Live little button that you can push on the top hand corner here, where if you push there, that will bring up the connection then to the studio, where we can then do live broadcasts, which we have done over the past couple of days, but I do like to voice track as live, so that's where that goes into.
Right, I'm just going to kind of just stop it over there and see my shuffling around here and trying to get this thing to go out of full screen. Right, there's that one over there, and I really want to go through. I mean, there's many that I can actually go through. I don't want to bore you too much. Let me just stop. Hold on. Nope. Stop with ads.
Hi, it's James from.
Right. Okay. So this one I found to be more educational. It is literally said. It says an educational video here. But what I liked about this is that it also shows the obviously the background, quote unquote, like, so obviously what happens on the floor when it comes to television outside broadcast. Let's have a look at this one, and I won't shuffle around too much, I promise.
Hello. Today we're going to be looking at outside broadcasting. With the help of some professionals, we're going to be answering the questions: what is an outside broadcast? Who is involved in outside broadcasting? And what does it all mean? Firstly, broadcast. The definition of an outside broadcast is the production of a television or radio program from outside of the studio. Outside broadcasts are most commonly used for covering news, live sport, or live music events. Now that we know what an outside broadcast is, we can look into what goes into making it all work. So what is involved in an outside broadcast? As an outside broadcast is filmed externally outside of a TV studio, a mobile production gallery is needed for the gallery crew to produce the show from. This is known as an outside broadcast truck, and come in all shapes and sizes depending on the size of the production. In order to transmit the output program back to the main TV station, an SNG truck is needed. This sends the signal via a satellite to the MCR in the TV station. Then the program is then sent to TX before being sent back to MCR. Here it is uplinked and broadcast by the satellites on the roof. The signal is then downlinked at people's homes where it can be watched on the TV. So now we've covered the basic signal path of an outside broadcast, let's get some deeper insight and hear from some professionals. So what is an SNG truck?
Well, SNG stands for Satellite News Gathering, and that means a way of getting the news and broadcasting it over satellite back to a studio. And it was devised so people could go to breaking news stories and be able to get the audio and video information back to the studio as fast as possible. The purpose of an SNG truck is to take signal from a camera or an outside broadcast truck and be able to deliver that signal onto a satellite. And that signal will be audio and video. So it comes into this truck and we use the various equipment behind me to monitor the signal, and then we send it into our satellite encoders, which turn that baseband video and audio signal into an RF signal, which is then sent out through some big amplifiers and through the antenna on the roof. From here that signal goes to somewhere like an MCR, a master control room, with earth station dishes, the big dishes, and that will pull the signal down, and then that signal will be back in its original baseband state, so the original audio and video that came out of a camera or an outside broadcasting truck.
So as John said, the signal is sent from the SNG truck from on top of the antenna on the roof to the MCR back at the TV station. So now let's ask another professional, what happens in the MCR?
So this is the MCR, or main control room, and this room has the responsibility for managing all the feeds that come in and out of the building. Every piece of pictures and sound and footage is managed here. The people who work here, such as myself, we are actually doing things such as tuning in satellite feeds, making recordings onto tape, onto disc, and preparing programs and break items for broadcast. The output of the transmission suite comes through this room where I said all the feeds are managed, and then it gets sent out of the building and to a third party, for example, such as Arqiva in Winchester, who will then uplink that onto satellite. For a viewer at home, for example, somebody with Sky, they will then be downlinking those pictures from the satellite that have been uplinked by the broadcaster.
As Gideon said, the MCR is one of the most important buildings in the whole broadcasting process, as it downlinks and uplinks signals. Before it can be broadcasted, however, the signal has to be sent to TX.
Standing by with a 109 break.
TX is just an abbreviation for transmission, and it is here in the transmission suite that the commercial breaks and extra graphics are added to the program. A TX operator has the important job of communicating with a lot of people and ensuring that programs run on and off air as scheduled. So the output of the transmission suite goes back to the MCR, where it is broadcasted by the satellites. So that's all the technical stuff out of the way. But what about how does a TV program get produced? Let's talk to our final professional, a producer at British Eurosport in London, who can help us answer our final question. What are the roles and responsibilities of a TV producer?
Right. The producer basically is the person that's in charge of the entire show. So that will be the start of the show, content of the show, the editorial line of the show. Then you've got the gallery here, so there's a range of people here. You'd have a graphics operator for all the graphics that come in, but that'll just be sort of name straps telling people who they are. Then there'll be a person called a PA, and they keep time with the show. So the show, you'll have half an hour at the top, so they'll have a range of stopwatches. So they have a stopwatch for the total duration of the show, for the whole half hour. Then they'll have a stopwatch on each individual section of the show. So they're just informing you all the time. You know, she'll talk to the TX operator for breaks, how long the breaks are, when we're going to breaks. She'll inform the presenter all the time. Presenter's got an earpiece in all the time, so he can hear her all the time. Then the director will look after all the cameras, and also the running of the VT. So, you know, the next item up may be an interview with, you know, Andy Murray. So he'll sort of run that in, and so then mix in between via the mixing desk behind me. And then behind the scenes, you'll have people, editors upstairs who are making the packages. You'll have a range of sort of assistant producers, they're called. So they'll be looking after making those packages. They may have gone out and done some filming. You as a producer would talk to them about what's expected from that interview, what you're trying to say within your studio, how that interview is going to sit within the studio. So they'll go out and have a range of questions. So all these little things you've got to think about as a producer and as an assistant producer.
As you can see, there are a lot of people needed to make a TV show. One person Tim forgot to mention is the sound engineer. They sit in a soundproof room separate from the rest of the gallery crew and are responsible for microphone levels, sound effects, and music throughout the show. So there you have it, the basics of an outside broadcast. Let's recap over some of the points we've learnt today. The definition of an outside broadcast is the production of a television or radio program from outside of the studio. It is most commonly used when covering news stories or live sports and music events. In order for a successful outside broadcast, there needs to be an outside broadcast truck for the gallery crew. This crew will consist of a producer who manages the running of the show, a director who manages the cameras and shots, a PA who keeps the timings, a graphics operator who makes name straps, and a sound engineer who ensures all sound is okay. Also needed is an SNG truck for uplinking the signal, a generator to power the trucks, an MCR and the TV station to downlink and uplink signals, and a transmission suite so the commercials and graphics can be added. Well, that's it for today. Thanks to our three professionals for their insight on the subject. We'll see you next time.
Alright, hold on a second, let me just get this out of the way. There we go. That's pretty cool. That's cool. In here. Alright. I got one very short one here, I'll close with that, and then we'll just get to the newsroom, and then we'll close the lesson there. But this one is cool. I'll tell you why, because this is more for an internet-based station, so it could be also, we could also set this up for a community station that doesn't have a lot of money, but very short. So let's just quickly watch this one over here.
On Radio.co here, you might be wondering why we're stood outside this nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Manchester City Centre. Well, we're actually here to help our friends at MCR Live get set up for a party they're throwing tonight in conjunction with the Shindigger Brewing Company, who actually occupy this building. So let's go inside and check out what's going on. Alright, so we're inside now. Reese, tell us a little bit about what's going on.
So we at MCR Live have teamed up with Manchester brewery Shindigger to launch some of their new beers. So it's Shindigger's event, their space, and we've come along with some of our resident DJs to curate the music and also to broadcast live across the network. It's really easy with Radio.co. We just plug in the record feed from the mixer into USB mixer and then into a laptop, and then we send it up to the cloud to then broadcast across our network on DAB and online.
Alright Reese, so we've got a pretty standard setup here. In terms of the DJ side of things, we've got two CD decks which are connected to a mixer. This is where the residents are going to be showing up later and doing their sets from. So in order to broadcast live, we've just simply got a Windows laptop. This is a cheap laptop, it's about £100 off Amazon, and it's running Windows 10. And in turn, we've got a USB sound card, right? And as you can see, it says audio in. So what we've got is a cable linking one of the outputs from the mixer. So all the laptop's going to do is it's going to connect to the Wi-Fi, which we've got here in the warehouse. The point of this is, you can broadcast really from anywhere with an internet connection. We haven't got racks of servers, we haven't got any sort of specialist technical equipment. All we've got is an internet connection and some power and a laptop. This will in turn be broadcast up to Radio.co, so people will be able to tune in from home, listen from anywhere via mcr.live, and it also then in turn goes out over DAB digital radio across Manchester too.
Formed, right? So you can imagine if there is a flood, or if there is a bombing, or if there is maybe a pandemic or whatever it may be. That's the programming, as you have seen in our recent years, specifically, obviously, again with COVID as our biggest, I say, let's say, I say biological, biological pandemic, and I say what am I trying to what's the word I'm trying to look for? Well, it was definitely breaking news, and it was definitely a tragedy. But just for us to also cover for quite a long time, again that the way that dynamic story would grow and grow, in the way we would also just be glued to, yes, actually our radio sets, right? Our radio, whatever in which way you obviously consume radio, if you have a radio set or whether it was on your cell phone, doesn't matter. But we were really locked into what medium gives us the most accurate and immediate form of news. Well, our radio does, right? So radio station does. So you can kind of think of it along the lines of that. But also, again, like I say, I want to break into a little bit more of what a speciality segment might look like, right? So let's go through some of the theoretics, and then let's stop on over as we normally do for some videos to enjoy. Okay, specialty shows are shows that go against the grain of regular programming. So they are different in sound and content to the rest of the shows on the station. In other words, they program themselves, or we programmed them differently. We program them differently. They're not AI just yet, so they can't program themselves. But you understand what I mean, right? So these can be specifically designed as weekly or daily shows as well. So I'm looking at things like business shows and lifestyle shows and maybe film critic shows and again, we say health shows, mental health shows, whatever it may be, you'll find across the spectrum, on our, I say, within our radio landscape, and you will know exactly how to kind of like identify, like kind of like you'll be able to say, oh, that's a specialty show. All these shows happen in times of tragedy when radio stations want to reflect the mood of the community, deliberately, excuse me, modify their programming to do so. Like I say, specifically now with the upcoming elections next week, there's going to be a lot of specialty programming that is scheduled across different stations, right? Because we want to cover every aspect, not just the voting aspect, but what happens afterwards, all the updates, again, obviously with the winning party being announced and so on and so forth. The weekly or daily specialty shows are created to cater to a slightly different core target market of a radio station and to attract a different audience. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't fall within the core target market. Again, many, many, many moons ago, when we explained the importance of making or creating niche content, excuse me, again, you can obviously hear I've got once again a flu. Um, but yes, so let's talk about back then. We said that, uh, we might be talking about, let's say, football at any one given point, but we know that obviously football fell into a composite listener diagram, like a diographic, right? Which is, it's part of their interest, which is part of their lifestyle, and that does mean that they would obviously be interested in, again, niche subtopics that we might bring up. Commercially, these shows are about bringing in different groups of people that would not ordinarily be created, or should I say catered for, through normal programming, right? Okay. So, tragedies and sensitive topics. So, for example, let's have a look at some of the biggest, or one of the biggest ones that South Africa faced, which was Nelson Mandela's death, of which stations again prepared for. I say for a very long time. We were right in the middle of that when I was at Prime Media. And when I say in the middle of that, and I think I have explained this again before, so because the death was something that the president was, or the former president was ill for quite a long time. We're talking about, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years. it was publicly a knowledge or public knowledge that the president was ill, back in and out of hospital. There were obviously private doctors that were at his home. It came out. You understand? There were a lot of reasons to be I say ready for that particular moment, when he actually did pass, that day that he did pass, which was the 5th of December 2013, a day that South African broadcasters had been preparing for, but were hoping never obviously had to arrive. But life is life, right? As the day that Nelson Mandela died. So it was the moment in which radio stations across the country got to throw away the format book completely. Everyone on the team had everything to contribute, had certain roles that they were given, and they were rotated because obviously we had to go home and get some rest and then come back and then start all over again. I'm saying with whatever it was that the station actually needed, and so we also had interchangeable roles, right? I think that's right, interchangeable roles that we would do. So perhaps maybe one day you would be working at 702, or the other day working at 947, or working for 947 and KFM at the same time. And you were producing, or you were presenting, or you were just compiling stuff, or whatever it may be, right? Or going out and finding boxes, or whatever it may be, right? So again, a lot of responsibility fell on the news editor specifically at that particular point. Prime Media has two at any one given point because of the talk factor and obviously the music factor, and then we obviously had the coalition between the two stations, or the two formats, I would say, as well as the program managers on either side of the music stations as well. So it was this moment in which radio stations across the country got to throw away, once again, as I said, that format book, and decided to say, okay, listen, like maybe every hour this needs to happen, during the hour this needs to happen, every day this needs to happen, every week. And the story was long running. In other words, it would stay around for quite a long time, and so it would also have to go and mutate in many different ways, throughout those 4, 5, 6 weeks, so that it doesn't become boring. Or one thing, definitely, it is definitely obviously us showing our respect for Nelson Mandela. Again, we were at the center of that, because he was our president and not the world's president, but the world was definitely looking at us. And so it was a very special, when I say a very special moment for South African broadcasting or journalism. It really was, because it was at the head of whatever the rest of the country, excuse me, the rest of the world, what it was actually doing. Right, the country was in mourning, of course, as we know, and it was the job of every radio station to capture the national mood. Everyone from everywhere. I even remember my parents going down as well to, where you go and you pass, you pay your respects, there was that opening allowed to the public to come across and say, pay the respects to the former president. And I say my parents are old, and they are, I say, left of center, immigrants, etc. That you wouldn't think it's just a normal, the normal core stock standard South African that would, think that this was an important thing. It was important to all South Africans, and he was to all of us, right? Most radio stations had imaging packages that we pre-produced, right? So that when it did happen, that you were first, quote unquote, or the first attempt, to be the first to be able to release, any media that should be, played out on radio. There were scripts that were available. There were obviously, I say, resources standing by, etc., to make sure that obviously felt as if it were done quite well, obviously with a lot of fluidity and quite easily, quite naturally, right? Okay, but imaging, packaging, and audio on standby, and it was not. But it was not this aspect that made radio so brilliant over this time. It was the fact that every presenter and every caller became vulnerable, intimate, and real. And it was incredible to obviously, again, what a massive loss, as we know, and we constantly say it really was a massive loss, because the repercussions of Mandela no longer being in this world. We've seen it. We've lived in South Africa, and we see how just kind of that he was a larger than life, almost an intergalactic kind of image, also a representation for a better world, and it wasn't only in South Africa where we felt the decay afterwards, slowly, but it was also maybe around the world, because Nelson Mandela was a global figure, and he was everywhere and anywhere that you would try and think of. Where was Nelson Mandela? Where had he been in his time after he was released, obviously, from jail, made president, and then started, obviously spreading his word and impact around the world. Great man, great legend. Anyway, it was an incredible, few days in which radio showed that it can be the greatest companion, that it has the ability to truly connect with people. So on this day, South African broadcasters learned how they could become the go-to medium with tragedy hits, when tragedy actually hit. And let's reflect on these few days on broadcasting, or of broadcasting, right? Firstly, and again, let me just, I just want to quickly pause. I want to just blow my nose. I'm just sorry. Just sorry. Excuse me. And I might blow my nose, like, quite unashamedly, as I'm doing this. Got a nice big old tissue here as well. Okay, anyway. Okay, so let's reflect again. Firstly, South African broadcasting had the opportunity to truly reflect the mood of the country. They took callers, they allowed them to cry, they allowed them to share intimate emotions. When other tragedies hit or sensitive topics arose, like listeners, we allowed our listeners to be open and honest, and to share their experiences and feelings with us. During this time, music stations did not leave the news to the news stations. They integrated it as part of the programming and gave listeners all the information that they needed. Music stations were teaming up with the news partners everywhere, but predominantly, obviously, the station had its own like news core, as I said. Like I said, primarily has its own core, but we look at, obviously, SABC, depending heavily, obviously, on SABC News. Then that's where their news would come from, solely, right? There would be no need, because otherwise, why do you have a news department, or like I say, an independent music a news giant, should I say? Music stations were teaming up with news partners to make sure that the news was credible as well as reliable. All right, so I just want to, again, kind of like pause and play some videos here. So obviously the first one, just to kind of remind us, is back obviously when this did happen. Yes, it isn't on radio. Just kind of to look at one of the segments of.
Nelson Mandela's struggle for freedom defined his life. He was born in the remote hills of South Africa's Eastern Cape. He was given the name Rolihlahla, which means troublemaker. He was only given the name Nelson by a schoolteacher later on. After moving to Johannesburg and studying law, Mandela's troublemaking politics began. And as a boxer, he became adept at picking fights and sparring with the apartheid authorities, which had increased its oppression against the black population. It was then that Mandela made the crucial decision to take up an armed struggle, launching the African National Congress's armed wing. He was militant and a firebrand, defiantly burning his passbook, a dreaded document the apartheid authorities used to control the movement of South Africa's black population.
The Africans want the franchise on the basis of one man, one vote. They want political independence.
That simple demand and the methods Mandela took to fight for democracy eventually saw him and others tried for treason and sabotage by the apartheid government, acts punishable by death. But they got life imprisonment instead, banished to Robben Island, one of the country's most brutal and isolated prisons. Another political prisoner, Mac Maharaj, remembers the first time he saw Mandela in the prison yard.
I could see from the way he walked and from his conduct that here was a man already stamping his authority on prison regime.
Mandela was released 27 years later.
I have spoken about freedom in my lifetime. Your struggle, your commitment, and your discipline has released me to stand before you today.
And his lack of bitterness towards the apartheid authorities helped him to lead one of the most remarkable political transitions of the 20th century. Mandela, the trained lawyer and lifelong rebel, outmaneuvered the apartheid leaders. And he steered South Africa's peaceful transition to democracy. He won a Nobel Peace Prize together with his former enemy, the apartheid leader F.W. de Klerk.
And to devote myself to the well-being of the Republic and all its people.
And then he became South Africa's first black president in 1994.
So help me God.
What marks Mandela's career as president, almost more than anything else, is that after 5 years he stepped down. There have been very few presidents in Africa who've ever given up willingly.
Don't call me. I'll call you.
His retirement years were busy with fundraising for charities close to his heart. He celebrated his 90th birthday with much fanfare and told CNN in a rare interview that looking back, he wouldn't do anything differently.
I don't regret it because the things that attracted me were things that pleased my soul.
Now those who loved and respected him look to his legacy.
And if we want to learn from him, learn that life is not made up of straight victories. It's made up of mistakes, zigzags, stumbling, picking yourself up, dusting off the dirt, treating the bruise, and walking again forward. And that's what Mandela is.
Goodbye.
Robin Kerno, CNN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
What? You almost forget, hey? You almost forget. Wow. What a man, really. Yeah. Anyway, almost forget. Genuinely. Sure. Okay. Got me a little bit emotional there for a second. All right. Okay, let's go back to just the lessons for a quick moment because I want to just break into some specialty radio for a second because I can see that there is. Let's move this up here. There are different things that I'd like to talk about as well, right? So just here, just close up on this particular, and again, I know that the lesson does focus heavily on tragedies, and again, that kind of like that uprootment of the normal music scheduling. We'll talk specifically on music radio, right? To be able to stop and sit and collaborate with the news side of life, right? Radio stations reacted very quickly and took charge of the situation. We really did, again, because there's there's a predetermined box, a literal box that every DJ was taken through. I'm saying we all knew exactly like there was scripts that were updated. There was music that had to be played. There were people that had to be phoned. There were obviously editors that had to be put on air and had to say certain things, and it was a little package, right? That was, like I say, updated on a regular occasion because again we didn't know when this was actually going to happen, and when it did happen, as a sidebar, no, there was actually a couple of there was one or two, I say, scares, right? So I remember so clearly, obviously, because our news editor from the 702 side put the station on lockdown, and she would say no one is allowed to leave because we don't just because within the next 2-3 hours or whatever it is, we will get some clarity on the situation and be able to say, okay, listen, like it's actually a go ahead, a move ahead. With everyone is going to then obviously, continue with a specific role as assigned according to our strategic rollout, right? Or you can go home, right? And that happened quite a few times, enough times for us to be like, oh, right, we are family here in the station. And it was, again, it might sound very exhausting, whatever it really was, and it was actually very, very exciting to be part of something a little bit bigger than everyday radio, and many took it upon themselves to organize vigils outside Mandela's family home in Houghton, and others gave away candles and letters for their listeners, in which personal stories were written to the Mandela family. So take note of this approach: is that we go and we elevate ourselves into further into our listeners' lives. There's not just this one, us and our job and what we do on air and just jabbering on about that. And jabbering is, I don't mean that in a dismissive way or a trivial way. I genuinely mean like us just talking as we normally do within certain contexts, and we do certain things. But it is about obviously reaching out to the community, making it every opportunity. Yes, we are opportunists in radio, so we want to take that opportunity and make it a little bit bigger and a little bit more, larger than life. Take note of this approach. Music radio stations played a whole lot of music that best summed up that particular mood, and it was carefully selected. So make sure that you're not playing any Jay-Z or whatever it may be. I don't know, right? But you see, the thing is that at that point as well, we have a whole world that is able to that is able and willing to give us content as well. So there might be a lot of there were so many celebrities, international celebrities that came down specifically and were in South Africa at that time, specifically for the vigils and whatever it may have been. And I think it was out in, if I'm not mistaken, that the big one was out in F&B Stadium, and it was massive. It was massive, man. We had people like Beyonce and Jay-Z that were there, etc., etc., and they were waiting. They were on a wait list. I'm saying those people were sitting and waiting just to be part of this and to pay their respects. Right, music radio is in the perfect position to bring listeners together through the power of music in such times. And one should throw out the usual playlist and reflect the mood that they're trying to obviously convey to a listener through the songs that they are playing as well. Presenters were real and vulnerable, but made it about the listener, not about them. So we weren't sitting there crying, because again, it makes a listener feel uncomfortable. I do understand at any one point, like you might say, this might be the right situation. I suppose maybe you can get a little bit emotional and teary-eyed, but not sitting there and bawling your eyes out. Rather let the listener lose a little bit of control and allow them just a platform, because again, we are the voice of the people. The nation turned to radio for information about the events after Mandela's passing and how to be the shoulder to cry on. Everything was focused on the listener and not the presenters, and it is crucial in such times to be there for listeners emotionally and reflect their experiences. All right. Let's quickly have a look here. Let's see how far this just before I move ahead in the station. Right. So I said, give me a station. Give me a second. Give me a station. Why not? Right. Just want to quickly have a look here. All right. So let me do this. I'm going to quickly finish. Let me finish actually, no. Let's just break away. I want to break away now to specialty segments, okay, specialty shows, and let's play a couple of videos that are going to be super cool. They're very interesting, and you are going to let me just I'll quickly intro each one. First, I said I want to do the top 40 one first. Guys, we know top 40 is a specialty segment. This is the one in the UK, just a little bit of a. That's definitely an advert.
Rolling?
Rolling.
Thanks, Will. Last chart, I said to Will, let's film this because it's never going to happen again. The last network chart. What's the date? Sunday the 30th of December 2018. So here.
Just please note that Genesis is being used in and I remember I said to you, obviously, like Andrew, the late Andrew was, I mean, he was obviously English, but he was South African at the end of the day. Genesis being used there. Just sidebar, Easter egg.
Here's what we do. I'm now about to offer next door and let him know he's got the chart network. Right, you ready for it, Luke?
Yep. Am I still doing the 2 minute, 1 minute?
Yeah, I assume so, yeah. So we have to let the network, Luke has to let the network know. So I'm going to give the chart network, which is the satellite, over here. We'll give that to Studio 3A, which is where the chart's going to come from. Then we listen on here. OS1 is the satellite feedback. We listen now to him doing his 2 minute and 1 minute. So you'll hear that in a second. As you can see, clock there, 2 minute and 1 minute for the network.
2 minutes, guys.
There you go. I thought we were going on one. Here we've got the data, which goes for people with apps, who listen on their phone. What else should it be? On laptops, computers, that kind of thing.
Love to.
And then over here, well, we've got this couple of minutes turnaround because we've just done the big show on Capital.
Believe in better.
We then go into the chart speed box.
If your mattress is
And I get ready with part one because we also shadow the show next.
Half-price winter sale. There's free delivery, and now extra offers on it.
Just turn that off because Will always leaves that on for me. So that's ready to go. So we'll wait for the 1 minute. So at the moment, we're listening to Capital off air. But this that I've now pre-faded is the chart network, as we showed you a minute ago over here. Any second now, 1 minute.
1 minute.
Right, so now in the Capital Studio, we change from 3B, which is where we are, to 3A, and the chart network for the very last time for all the Bauer stations and anyone else who takes the chart. That's now ready to go.
Because green flags do all of this too. And we'll have your AA renewal quote.
I just want you to note, obviously, I mean, why am I showing you this? Just have a look at this one person. And remember I said to you about that octopus feel. So obviously he's the other technical producer, right? And you can hear that the presenters are somewhere else. They're either on location outside broadcast or they're at another station outlet, right? Outlet post. Very interesting again, just to see how there's so much happening. I'm sure it's interesting to you. This unfortunately, I said unfortunately, I've seen before. So always chaos, right? And this person really genuinely needs to know what's going on.
Green flag. Common sense to the rescue. There may be a charge for call-outs with the same problem. Savings based on our closest equipment in the UK vehicle cover for vehicles 10 years.
Everyone around the local stations now will all be pre-fading and getting ready for the beginning of the chart. They would have finished their shows and they would have back-timed if they've got news. That's why it starts at
What does that mean? It's being syndicated. Very cool,
2
right?
minutes past. They would have back-timed for the news or adverts or whatever it might be. And we're on in 15.
Join the German Doner Kebab phenomenon with 70 branches worldwide. Get off your first order on Uber Eats with promo code GDK Eats. For a limited time, the new Uber Eats customers only terms apply. Find your nearest restaurant at GermanDonerKebab.com.
And listen to the satellite. Yeah, we're getting it. Yeah, and what you're hearing there, what you're hearing there is the delay coming back. And we're on the air. And that is the last chart, network chart ever. Thank you, Will. Bye, chart fans.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Then I want to show you there were two. Okay, sorry. I want to go first to the old time radio. We're looking at, like I say, specialty segments. And how did, and let's just enjoy this one. Then I want you to have a look. We'll close the lesson and we'll close the lesson with how to choose some talk radio topics for a radio show from obviously one of my favorite radio.co, right? So old time radio. Let's check how this actually happens. Very cool. Amazing short film on old time radio sound effects back off the mic. Yeah, just let's watch. See what a second, please.
And now we come to the thrilling final episode. Driver of the jitney from Carsonburg to Copper Springs has a double load today. Pete's ancient bus is carrying the Flying Bee payroll and a passenger, his niece Betty. Little do Pete and Betty suspect as they chug over the desert wastelands that just around the next curve, Shifty Sam Hicks and his henchmen lie in wait.
It hasn't been the same without you, Betty, but now that you're back, you'll find nothing's changed and nothing's happened.
Nothing's happened? Why, I heard you had 2 new horses. I can't wait to give them a run.
You be careful where you ride these days. Got a band of rustlers operating in the neighborhood.
Oh, pooh. You don't seem very scared, carrying the payroll in every month.
But you better stick close to home.
All right, Uncle, don't worry. Now, how have the new...
Stay right there, buddy. Where's the Flying Bee payroll?
What'd you say? Somebody held up the jitney. Probably the Hicks gang. Bring your horse. They've headed for Pine Creek. Guess they're going through the gap. Hurry up and I'll meet your friends.
And so, as the storm breaks around them, the sheriff's posse gathers at Pine Creek Forks, prepared for action.
How amazing that is. Just amazing in terms of this, how they would create the sound, obviously, of the thunderstorm, etc., in the studio itself. And again, you saw the 4 voice actors just here, as you can see. I just want to forward away from the actual visuals, you know, but more focus here. Just have a look here.
Men, Hicks and his gang have been around this country too long. We're going to clean them out, today. But we got to remember that old Pete Belland is with them, and we don't want him to get hurt. All right, boys, let's hit out! Come on, men, we're gaining on them. They've seen us, Tom? Right, fellas. They probably have fresh horses at the creek. Hold up there. We'll set fire to the gap and stop. Whoa! Slim, you chop a couple of them small trees. Right. We'll spread a fire they can't get through. These are pretty green for burning, Sam. Grass is dry as tinder here. That'll get it started. Shorty, you get some of that dead wood burning in a hurry. Grass is catching on. It's dry, all right. How about the trees, Slim? Out ready? Move back. He's coming now. Cut another one farther back. Apache's closing in on us. Here they come. We better hold them off till this fire gets too hot to cross. Quick, Shorty, over that track. That fire's sure too hot for us, Sheriff. And they can get out of range anytime they want to mount. Looks like they'll give us a slip.
Why couldn't you get through in my car, Sheriff? They might do something to Uncle if we don't hurry.
I'll bet we could get through in the car if we got a good start.
It's worth a try. Who'll drive it?
Don't forget he's my uncle, Sheriff. I'll drive it through myself.
You'll drive nothing. Get out and get behind the tree.
They're mounting up, Sheriff. They're heading down the creek. All right, Jake, let's go. 2 of you men come with us. The rest of you keep firing. Slip! Come on! Follow me!
All right, forward. This way. Come on. All right, come on. Keep on, boys.
And so we leave old Pete safe and sound with Betty in her new car. And to our friends of the radio audience, we bid a pleasant good night.
Yeah, okay. Me personally, I love anything old. You know what I'm saying? Anything old, nostalgic. This, I loved it. Love it. Love it. Anyway, so but what an amazing. So it's not just about the way they obviously came up with the effects, but there's that coordination and that synchronicity with the different, obviously by the different cast members. You know, and again, obviously well performed, but well practiced and rehearsed at any one given time. Think of obviously like those guys that are ripping off the wood and cutting like the paper or whatever. This had to be practiced, right? To get that real feel. Obviously I love that the little kid is like super engaged. That's what we talk about, like engaging a radio, right? All right, let's quickly, okay, before we close up with choosing topics for radio, and it may seem that I'm going back and forth, but you know me, I like to this Uber Eats thing. Yeah. Now, come on, please. YouTube adverts. The bane to everyone's existence. Just give me a second. Second, yeah. Um. Okay. All right. We'll come and close up with that in just a second. Just want to start to share there. Just quickly close up on the lesson here. So, just for something for you to think about at the same time. To emphasize, presenters should never or should not make these moments about them. Right? We're talking about obviously the other side, not maybe the entertainment side, like you just see now in specialty radio. Right? Think about COVID and how did radio programming actually change something. I know that you weren't alive for Nelson Mandela's passing, but you were alive for again the recent obviously COVID pandemic, and how again it was just like, yes, it was horrible. People died around us, and it was just not great in terms of how the world obviously just shut down and whatever it may have been. But once again, just to be able to remember, not ever actually forget how media did assist us, and also it also manipulated us in many different ways. And again, it's always what I say: fake news. That was the rise of fake news, because it was so long. It was the time period of COVID, and we were stuck in our homes, no access to kind of anything. Very militant society, the global society that we were living in, and a lot of scare tactics, etc., 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 etc. I can carry on and on and on, but the way that obviously media was so dependable, credible media, so television and obviously radio and print was constructed, orchestrated, and run right, was just quite again just quite amazing, to always look back as a professional and be able to say, you know, like it really, for me, I don't know another way but to say, but it excites me. It really does. It's just when you do love a medium and you love your job so much, I suppose, at the end of the day, like anything that does, make it existentially more complex for myself as well, more interesting and in depth, or adds a lot of depth to it. Just gives you a little bit of a spark, saying, "Yeah, man, that's why I love radio." Stay connected during difficult times. So don't just report the events, but feel them, because your audience will be the person that, or the people that feel them with you, right? Make recordings on streets with voxes. Ask what they saw, ask what they heard. Ask what, I say, ooh, that was the first time in my life I was going to say ox. Also ask them how they feel. Tragedies allow presenters and shows to step out of their content comfort zones and to discuss what else can be done to add layers to the content. So if the show is aimed at parents, ask how parents can explain the event to their children upon, let's say, opening up debates. Really ask some hard questions. Otherwise, why have the debate at all? Find a personal way to deal with tragedies that have multiple casualties. Try again that empathy. Try to lock into that empathetic nature of how would another person see this? How are the people being affected by their husbands, wives, children being killed in these particular instances? And again, elevate accordingly, so that you do not at any one given point come off as insensitive. Right, radio stations must do everything they can to help their communities and allow. Just give me a second. Yeah, I just want to stop this. Let's stop that. Okay, all right. Find a personal way to deal with tragedies that have obviously multiple casualties. Radio stations must do everything they can to help their communities and allow your listeners to share their feelings on air, on your social media. Right, okay, there is activity 3, activity 4C in the Next Level Radio book, page 168. And we will learn about compiling music in the next lesson. What I want to do is I want to stop the share, and I want us to close with, this little video here from radio.co about how to find yourself some talk topics, right? Choose talk topics for your radio shows.
Get on the air from anywhere.
One of the best things about running your own radio station is that it gives you the freedom and opportunity to create content that you want to broadcast, regardless of the subject matter or genre you're passionate about. However, this can sometimes be a daunting task because there are limitless possibilities to the types of things that you can discuss. So, how do you go about picking the right topics for your radio station's audience? In this video, we're going to show you how to choose the most engaging talk radio topics for your shows, the kind of topics that will keep your listeners tuning in again and again. And not only that, we're going to show you the formula that professional radio stations use to replicate this process. If you use these strategies, you'll be on the right track to consistently producing high quality, engaging content that will help you build your audience and grow your listeners. So firstly, let's look at choosing engaging themes. A lot of radio stations are quite flexible in terms of their structure and the topics they cover, but in general, most have predefined themes or goals so they always stay on point. So, for example, let's say you're running a breakfast show which focuses on world news. This is going to appeal to quite a wide audience. Alternatively, if it's a show that runs on local news, this is a more niche audience. So your radio station's shows can be as broad or as specific as you want, as long as you have an overall theme or goal, which in this case is the news. Having overriding themes or goals will give your station's output more coherence. Being a radio station owner or a station manager is a bit like being a newspaper editor, in that you're taking lots of different shows and different voices and shaping that into a consistent output. Now, there's an endless amount of topics that you can choose from, like news or current events, as we've just mentioned, or educational topics like history or science, political commentary, sports, music, satire, or just something fun that you're interested in. So, for an example, let's take a look at Adam Bates' show from Manchester Live, where his theme throughout is, "What do you do on unexpected days off?"
And it was just really disappointing. If you've had a snow day, I want you to let me know on MCR is live on Twitter, or AdSpates also on Twitter as well. I want to find out. I want to know, like, what did you do? What did you do the day off? Have you ever had a day off that you weren't expecting? That's the question I've been asking all week on social media. We have some of your, some of your stories coming up after this. This is Old School and Urban Cone on MCR Live.
She thinks that love is overrated.
Now, as you've just heard, he's picked out a theme in advance, and he's even asked his audience to get involved. This makes it more interactive and fun, and it allows the listeners to find out what other listeners are getting up to. So let's keep listening.
Oh, I ruined the ending. Oh no, building up to it all that time. It's Adam here with you on MCR Live, Old School, and I can't believe it. You know, as a DJ or even just presenting on radio, you're not supposed to crash any lyrics. But if you're building up for all of the song just for that bit, devastated. My name's Adam here with you till 11 o'clock when the Valenti Project take over. So I was talking about snow days and how I was really building up and getting excited for a snow day this week. It didn't happen. So on social media, I was asking about your snow days or your unexpected days off from work and what you got up to. Jack has been on Twitter and she said, "We had a snow day a couple of weeks ago because the snow was taller than our heads. Hashtag Atlantic Canada." Oh yes, international baby here on MCR Live. Yes, because you can listen online.
So you should now really begin to see a pattern forming here. He continues the topic in between tracks to get a flow going, and it's a rather neat way to weave together different points of view and ideas to build an overall theme. Now, the point is, regardless of the subject matter itself, always good to set themes and goals to give your show a direction and connect everything together in a more seamless manner. Now, when it comes to actually picking topics, there's not really a right or wrong answer in terms of what you choose. But it's important to always think about whether the topic itself is going to be of interest to your listeners and how much it's going to actually engage them in your show. And it's also worth considering how much you know about the said subject and whether you can talk about that in an authoritative manner. And then once you've picked your topic, the next step is to work out ways to build on top of this theme. Now, there really isn't a limit to the topics or themes that you could pick for your station, or for your show for that matter, but it is incredibly important to make sure that those topics that are chosen relate to the other types of content that your show is putting out, and more generally to the overall tone of your station's output. I kind of like to think of this as being a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. So each piece of content needs to loosely fit together to make up a bigger picture. As I've just mentioned, some of the things that are worth considering when you pick a topic are your own knowledge of this subject. Ultimately, the more you know about a subject and the more you understand it, the more you'll be able to command your audience's attention. And then also how much demand there is from your audience, because if you're picking topics that your audience aren't going to be able to relate to easily or that don't fit the context of your show, then you're really doing your station's output a disservice. You know, in radio, it's all about the audience. It's about thinking who your audience is and then creating great content for that audience. And then lastly, the other point I would make is that if you're making your shows available to download once they've been broadcast, you need to think about whether the subject itself will have longevity. Now, these kind of subjects that have more longevity are what we like to call evergreen topics. And if you are making a show available for download post-broadcast, then it really is worth thinking about subjects that are going to have more longevity, because they're going to stay more relevant and they can continue drawing in listeners over time whilst still being highly engaging during the actual broadcast. And in fact, one of the easiest ways to ensure the topics you cover are going to keep bringing in listeners again and again is to invite guests and experts onto your shows and then create loose themes around their area of expertise. Ultimately, any guests or experts you bring in are going to have something to say. And if they're really good at what they do, that kind of content is going to consistently bring in listeners over time. And then alternatively, if we look at something like a breaking news segment, although that's going to be highly engaging during your actual broadcast, it's not really going to have much shelf life once it's gone out. Having a fresh perspective on things can really shake up your shows. That's why guests are a great way of encouraging discussion and debate amongst your listeners. Now, in the UK, we have broadcasters and stations like BBC Radio that are really great at doing this. Whereas in the US, there's also some really interesting stations like WNYC who are consistently getting new people on board to freshen up their shows. Whether you're doing an interview with a guest, or maybe it's more of an informal chat, or you're encouraging listeners to phone in, other points of view always provide interesting avenues of conversation. And as a broadcaster, as a DJ, that makes your job much easier, because what you're essentially doing is curating that output. So you're essentially presenting a loose topic, and then you're getting your guests or your listeners to respond. And this actually makes your job a lot easier, because all you really have to do is follow up with questions and keep directing the conversation. It's like the old adage is that people love to talk about themselves, and you can essentially give your listeners and your guests a platform to do that, and they're creating the content for you. Now, one of the best ways to pick topics that will resonate with your audience is to look at current events. So you can do this by checking newspaper headlines, looking at trending topics on Google, or even just looking at social media. Now, one of the tricks that I really like, and it's a really easy way to find topics that will have a real cut through and reach the widest possible audience, is to use Google News alerts. So these are notifications that you can set up, and it alerts you when certain keywords are being used in news articles or in blog posts. And a lot of this stuff is like kind of what's hot, what's happening, what are people really talking about now on the internet. So these are perfect subjects for you to then piggyback off. And a lot of these subjects are things that are really hot topics on the internet. It's things that people are really talking about and getting passionate and fired up about. So they're perfect things for you to then pick up and piggyback off that audience. And then alternatively, you can follow, whichever news outlets that you're interested in or that your audience are interested in on things like Twitter and Facebook. So as I was saying before, regardless of whatever trending topics it is that you choose, just make sure that they're relevant for your audience. They really do need to be on point for your shows. So, for example, let's say you're a rock station. Well, if you're talking about the latest J-pop hits, then that's not really going to get much cut through with your listeners. But you can think about what are the breaking, trending stories that are really happening around the rock music industry at the moment. Or, for example, let's say you're talking about breaking political events. Well, that's not really going to fit in between different pop tracks that you're playing, because, that's just going to feel out of character. Whereas interjecting the latest celebrity news in between the hits that you're playing, that might work. So, it's always just about identifying what it is that your audience cares about, looking for what it is that's really happening out there, and merging those two things together. And the internet is the most powerful tool for doing this. Everything is at your fingertips. But, as I mentioned before, it's incredibly important that you do filter out irrelevant stuff. So stuff that doesn't add to your show, or stuff that doesn't fit the format, or just things that your audience aren't really going to care about. It's not always about what it is that you want to talk about. You need to talk about what it is you think your audience wants to talk about. And to do that, it really comes down to understanding your niche. So according to radio industry experts, single subject or niche radio shows and stations are often some of the most popular online. Now, that kind of thinking can be applied to pretty much any industry. So your potential listeners could be sports fans who are passionate about a certain team, or people who lean towards a particular political persuasion. Now, whilst I do appreciate that politics and religion can be taboo, they're also subjects that can potentially draw in huge audiences. Now, we're not saying that your show or your station needs to be geared exclusively to that topic, but ultimately covering subjects that are controversial will attract listeners. However, it is also important not to go to extremes that are going to alienate other potential listeners. So what you really need to do is find ways to air all sides of an argument. And as we mentioned earlier, using guests is actually one really good way of doing this, because you can get your guest to express their opinion, and then you can act as the devil's advocate and, reflect the opposite opinion. And then your listeners, who may sit on either side of that, can then phone in and give their opinion. And ultimately, if you can attract listeners with opposing views, whether it's sports, politics, or any subject that your listeners are actually passionate about, it's going to increase your audience in the long run. Because what you're essentially doing is you're attracting both sides of that argument to your station, and you're getting double the audience. So to use the sport analogy again, do you want fans of one team or another team, or do you want fans of both of those teams arguing on your station? That's what you're looking for. And that kind of scenario is going to get listeners fired up and passionate, and that's what you want. And it is going to have a dramatic impact on your listener numbers if you do that. I mean, in my personal opinion, there's no point in just focusing on one side of the argument exclusively and then just talking about with people that also care about that in a silo. You want to incorporate other opinions, opposing opinions, because that's where dynamic, interesting conversations come from. And if you get this right, not only are they going to be talking about it on your station, they're going to go out to their social media networks and talk about it with their followers. And then that's going to bring in more listeners. And then essentially, you're creating this sort of 360 approach to your content and output. And like I said before, your listeners and your guests are actually doing the hard work for you, and then what you're doing is just directing all of this and shaping where you want the narrative and the conversation to go. And that's one of the key skills to being a great broadcaster. And ultimately, this approach will help you reach the widest possible audience whilst attracting very niche but very passionate audiences. So you may have noticed throughout this presentation, I've been trying to really reiterate thinking about what it is your listeners care about, because ultimately your listeners are your lifeblood. And the best performing topics for your radio station will come from understanding your listener base and creating topics and themes around the things that they care about. So if you've ever been in a conversation with someone who's discussing a topic that you're not really interested in, well, you just immediately disengage and you switch off and you stop paying attention. And it's definitely true that listeners will do the same thing. I mean, really, you're asking your listeners to give up their time to listen to you. So why would they do that unless they really care about what it is you have to say? And by knowing who your listeners are, kind of inside out, you can create and broadcast really interesting content that's going to resonate with them really well. And at the end of the day, that's going to allow you to create a deeper, longer lasting bond with your listener. And if you do create, highly engaging content, then that's going to make your shows more compelling, and it's going to want your listeners to join into that conversation. And this makes your listeners feel closer to you, and ultimately it keeps them coming back again and again. And as a broadcaster, that's what you want. You don't want someone to just tune in once, think, this isn't for me, and tune out again. So when it comes to picking topics and thinking about what kind of content it is you should be creating for your station, knowing your listeners inside out is the easiest way to guarantee the topics you pick are going to be right for your listeners and that they're going to be something that they can relate to. So how do you really get to know these listeners? Well, there's a few different tools and tricks that you can use, and I'm going to take you through some of them now. So first of all, look at your analytics, whether that's Google Analytics on your website or analytics in your actual radio station. So on radio.co, for example, we have built-in analytics that show you important things like your listener's location, the devices that they've used to connect, whether that's a desktop, a mobile phone, whether they've connected via something like Sonos, and it'll also tell you what times of day people are tuning in. Now, this is incredibly useful in the long run because you're going to get to know what your listeners' habits are. and then you can see what's working and what's not, and then you can refine what you're doing based on that information. So if people are tuning in to your shows in the morning, then they're probably listening on the way to work. So you can focus your efforts on that part of the day and begin to create content and different topics around that. So going back to that original example we used from the Manchester Live breakfast show, which could be something just as simple as asking your listeners to call in and tell you about their worst commuting examples. And if you field and screen these people before you put them live on air, then you're going to be able to pick out the funniest and most relevant stories. And then secondly, the other thing you can do in terms of analytics is obviously look at your website. So you can find out an awful lot of information about your listeners, such as where they're coming from, what they've searched for to find you, and what the most popular pages are within your actual website. Google Analytics is an incredibly valuable tool because firstly, it's free, and it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about how people are using your website. And you can then use this information about your listeners' habits and turn that into your content strategy. And then you can use this information to determine what topics and subjects you should be covering for your audience. Now, if you're not quite sure where to start with some of this stuff, it doesn't hurt to just actually speak to your listeners and just ask them questions. So you can use things like SurveyMonkey or Typeform and get feedback from your listeners about your shows. So you can ask them, what is it that you liked most about the show, or is there anything that can be improved? And then from that, you can begin to build up a picture about what's working for you and what's not. And whilst this might seem quite simple on the surface of it, there's nothing really wrong with that. You don't always need to have overcomplicated processes for working this stuff out, and there's nothing wrong with just actually asking listeners what they want to hear. I mean, that's why DJs often ask listeners to call in with their music requests after all. And when it comes to communicating with your audience about this stuff and understanding what topics you should be covering, as I mentioned earlier, social media is one of the best ways to do this. So it's really important to be able to get your head around how you can harness social media to improve your output and keep it really on trend. And it may seem obvious, but social media is where people are talking about this stuff. And whether it's Twitter, Facebook or Facebook groups, it's a place for you to go and do your research, and understand what it is that people are talking about around the themes and goals that relate to your station's output. Now again, like with all of this stuff, obviously you do need to make sure you're filtering out stuff that's irrelevant, because there's a lot of stuff out there, obviously. But if you want to get, a good understanding of what it is that your listeners are talking about, what it is that they care about and that they're discussing online, then social media is the place to do that. And by doing your research like this, you'll have such a good understanding of what it is that a potential listener really wants to hear. And in turn, that's going to allow you to create an incredibly passionate audience for your station. So what I want to cover in this final slide is how to take all of these topics and then deliver them in a way that's going to be coherent. And one of the greatest ways to do this is to use the radio show clock format. So once you've assembled all of your topics for your show, it's a good idea to plan them so the flow of your show works. Now, a radio show clock is not really that complicated. It's essentially a pie chart with all of the elements of your show mapped out over the course of the hour, or however long your show actually is. So you can see we've got a show clock here. Now it has a mix of music, presenter talk, interview, and an intro and an outro to bookend the start and the end of the show. By organising your topics using a radio show clock, you can give your content a good fluid structure that helps you to sound more professional. Now obviously, different presenters all have different presenting styles, and you can use the radio show clock format as strictly or as loosely as you like. So some people like to prepare well in advance and know exactly what they're going to say and when they're going to say it, and other presenters and DJs prefer to be a bit more fluid and and prefer to improvise as they're going along and react off and bounce off different things that are actually happening in the moment. But by using a radio show clock to plan your content, it means you're never going to veer too far from what your ultimate goal is for that show. You know, and regardless of the style of the presenter or the show itself, radio show clock is a great way to discipline your output and make sure that the content and topics you're covering are engaging for your listeners. So hopefully this has given you some food for thought and some good
Good. Nice video.